Welcome back to Focus Today. Always a delight to have with us one of our good friends, Jodell Onstott. She's the author of YHWH Exists, one of the great researchers of our day. And YHWH Exists, really an incredible resource. If you don't have this, well, you need to get it in your library. And it's this big book right here. There it is. There's a picture of it there on the screen. And it's incredible. So let me encourage you. You can go to YHWHExist.com and check it out there or at the bookstores. And it's not an easy read, and you won't read it in one night. This is a resource book. You'll have it in your library, and you'll refer to it many, many, many times. Hi, Jodell. Good to see you again.
Good morning, Perry. How are you?
Oh, doing fine, fine, good. Waiting for spring.
Yes. Well, we have the opposite problem that you have in that I think we had all of 3 days of winter. Some of, my kids are out getting tans and all of that in the south. So we're rather enjoying this winter.
Okay, well, good for you. Well, listen, a lot to talk to you about, and I'm delighted to know that you are willing to go in this area a little bit. As you know, the president is thinking about overturning the Johnson Amendment. Maybe you can explain to our viewers and listeners what that is and why that would be important.
Now, this is one of my favorite platforms because I have actually been arguing that this amendment should be overturned since I became aware of it, probably for about the last 10 years. So there's a lot of misinformation out there, and it has been erroneously associated with the separation of church and state, as though if you take away this amendment, all of a sudden the separation between church and state magically disappears. And that couldn't be further from the truth. So let me just read to you what the Johnson Amendment states.
Please do.
It states that it shall... Those that receive tax-exempt status, this would be under the IRS code C 501c3. It says that a party that receives tax-exempt status shall not be able to influence legislation and cannot participate in or intervene in the political campaigning process or the endorsing of candidates. This is dangerous, dangerous wording. This legislation was passed on July 2nd, 1954. The very next day, the Washington Post came out and stated that no political organization or no organization, period, that receives tax-exempt status can take political stances. That was how the Washington Post interpreted this legislation. Well, this is the reality of that. There is not a clear demarcation between, this is a belief of faith, and this is actual life. They are supposed to, and they naturally overlap each other. For instance, abortion. That is a matter of faith. It is a matter of social justice. But what happens the moment there is legislation regarding abortion? Does that mean that the church pastors have to immediately go silent? So these are issues for our day. And this legislation this amendment really makes the church impotent. It limits the church's voice in educating its children. So it's a very, very powerful amendment that, in my opinion, should certainly be revoked.
There's two things here, Jodell, that's very interesting, and you mentioned it, and that is legislation and candidates. Now, part of the Johnson Amendment was further interpreted that a church could talk about an issue and maybe even take petition signatures on an issue, but the pastor could not stand up and endorse a candidate or tell the people how to vote for a candidate. So how did the legislation part squeeze through?
It really comes down to the wording. And legislation can be interpreted one way in one generation, and you wait 2 or 3 generations and it can be interpreted in an entirely different way. And unfortunately, the wording of this, even though it has historically been seen to just deny the endorsement of candidates and the allowance for a political platform, it crosses over, and it is very tenable because a a court 2 or 3 generations from now can use it in a totally arbitrary and a totally, I would say, non-constitutional way to deny a church's ability to influence legislation on any issue, whether it's divorce. And let's not forget, historically, the church is actually very, very important to the legislative process in opposing the government. Throughout American history, the church is kind of the equilibrium where if one branch of government or all branches of government go askew, then it's the pulpit that restores that sense of morality and that sense of liberty in the people. The anti-slavery movement was preached from the pulpit. The American Revolution was preached from the pulpit. So that is a very important part of American history, and we're kind of almost wanting to rewrite that history and silence the very important role that the church has in influencing social justice and political opinion.
What's so interesting about this, Jodell, when the culture jumped on the Johnson Amendment and melded it with a misunderstanding of the separation of church and state, it really took the church argument completely out of the picture, as you just mentioned, because at the end of the day, everything we're talking about here is morality. It's got a spiritual base to it, a moral base to it. And if the church was wiped out from speaking on that moral base, then we have what we have today, which basically anything goes.
It really does. And the teeth of this is that a lot of your Christian schools have a 501c3 status where they are tax exempt. And a lot of schools have refrained from teaching moral values regarding marriage, what constitutes marriage, regarding abortion. A lot of these are refrained because schools don't want to be in jeopardy of losing that tax-exempt status that makes it somewhat affordable for their constituents to participate. So it is definitely a amendment that should be repealed and allow the church. It comes down to freedom of speech. Just because you receive a tax exempt status does not deny your ability to express your opinion or to encourage others, to educate others regarding that opinion. Part of the legislation specifically prohibits the publication of materials, literature that educate the public on a particular candidate or a particular position. So again, it comes down to freedom of speech, which I believe should trump this amendment.
Let me ask you one quick question before we take a break. If the Johnson Amendment is overturned, what impact do you think will have, if anything, on the American church when it's already been conditioned subconsciously to have a separation between the church and the state?
I think it will occur very slowly. Those churches that are very comfortable, their congregations that are very comfortable with their political positions, I think will probably excel, and they will endorse candidates. They would make their positions known. But you have a lot of pastors who are very slow, and they are actually oppose this amendment being revoked simply because they feel it will divide their congregations. It's kind of the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. You have those congregants that support abortion, those that oppose it. This election was a very divisive election, so they don't want to see politics divide their local congregations. But, I think you can look at it that way as a negative, but you can also look at it as a positive for a means of open dialogue and for a means of let's talk about these issues. Let's not just avoid them and make everything kind of a kumbaya session where we avert those things that really have the potential not to divide us, but to actually heal us and our nation.
Well said. All right, let me take a quick break. We're talking to Jodell Onstott. She's the author of YHWH Exists, Volume 1. This is an incredible resource and one of the great research pieces out there. And let me encourage you to put this in your library. Takes a while to read all the way through it, but it's a reference book as well. You'll go to it a bunch of times. YHWH Exists, and you can correspond with her at YHWHExists.com. We'll be right back.
I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.
Welcome back, and as always, a delight to have with us Jodell Onstott. She is the author of YHWH Exists and one of the great researchers of our day, and just enjoy the conversations we have with her because she helps us do a lot of research and bring balance to a lot of these topics. There's a picture of YHWH Exists. It's a huge book and a great resource for anybody's library. You can correspond with her through YHWHExists.com. Jodell, you and I have talked a lot about what the Bible says and history says about borders and immigration and assimilation. And the president, as you know, has run into incredible pushback from his temporary travel ban. Some would not call it a travel ban, but I think in basic terms, that's pretty much what it is. And even now, Ninth Circuit Court has pushed back on it. I don't know where that leaves us on an appeal from a judge. We'll see where this goes. But why do you think there's such an opposition for wanting to have strong borders and proper assimilation?
It really comes down to the political discourse that has occurred in the last 8 years. There has been this huge movement to this idea that we are all one society, one people. And the reality of that concept in play, it does not transcend the idea of consequences. It's just something that this generation has not been taught. And unfortunately, even we have some more mature people of this generation that don't even look at the consequences of those policies. The fact that it is fiscally unstable and untenable. The fact that politically, when you bring in people who are so divergent with your ideas of constitutional law, and you bring that into your society, it really does produce instability that we are actually seeing play out in riots across the United States. Now, it may not always be in the forefront, but a lot of times behind the scenes, that is what's going on, and that is what is motivating the riots that you see, whether it's at Berkeley or Chicago or some of these other places. And it is just something that we all want. I mentioned this whole idea of this kumbaya session. Everybody is wanting the utopia without really making the hard decisions to get there.
I'm really concerned about the anger that's associated with this. And I guess that's a whole nother topic. But biblically, how do we handle a genuine refugee who's running for their lives versus immigrants who want to come in and take over?
Well, the Bible has some constitutional protocols that we don't, some protections. First of all, if you had a refugee who was fleeing from another nation, you were obligated to give them asylum. As a matter of fact, King Hezekiah did this to a King Padai, that in a country north of Israel. And that is one of the reasons why Assyria attacked Israel during the 14th year of Hezekiah's reign. We don't find that story in Scripture, but we do find that story in the Assyrian reliefs that relate the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. Now, for America, or actually, let's stick with ancient Israel for a moment. One of the protocols that ancient Israel had was that every single piece of land belonged to a family. If it was not owned by a family, then the cities themselves were divided by individual owners. So if you were going to give refugees asylum, if you were going to allow them to immigrate, you really had to take them into your home. There was no, we're just going to build, refugee centers on desolate tracts of land and bring, 5, 10, 15,000 people in. That simply would not have occurred because, Perry, you would have had to have donated your backyard for that to occur. You would have had to have been willing to that. So, and even coming into the land did not give the immigrant the access to the political system. In ancient Israel, it was 3 generations. If you immigrated from a peaceful nation, say, such as Britain or France or Germany, if you immigrated from a peaceful nation, an allied nation, it was 3 generations before your children could vote. If you immigrated from a hostile nation such as Iran or even Yemen, Somalia, any of those nations, then it was actually 10 generations, almost 300 years before your children had access to the legal process as far as voting was concerned. Wow. So these are protections and safeguards that we do not have in the United States. This makes us a lot more volatile to immigrants that come in and have an agenda. You know, Sharia has some teachings within the doctrine that teach you to infiltrate, to immigrate, to assimilate into the land, and to pretend as though you are one of the people of the land. All the while, the plotting is going on behind the scenes, and you don't see it until there is a bombing at, a marathon, or there is some other public gathering that becomes a target, whether it is a rock concert or celebration of a holiday. All of those become targets. But the process begins the moment that those threats come into the land. And we really don't like those. We don't like to hear the fact that everything is not safe and everything is not a utopia situation. I think that this generation really has difficulty accepting the fact that not everything is nice and not everything is, done in brotherly love.
Is there, I only got about 3 minutes left here, Jodell, is there a moral violation where we are letting immigrants in at any cost and giving them anything when we haven't taken care of our own? For instance, our governor's now trying to declare the state of Oregon as a sanctuary state, which is interesting, not a city, but a state. And yet we have one of the largest populations of homeless veterans living on the streets of Portland. We're not even taking care of those. Where do you draw the moral line here?
You know, we have this idea that it's our job to save the world as the United States of America because we are the wealthiest and the most prosperous of nations thus far in the industrialized age. But at what expense? At what cost? I absolutely agree that we have a moral obligations to our people first, not only to our veterans, but also to a lot of the people that are stuck in poverty. If you look at the number of people that have gone on to the food assistance system, that number has drastically increased over the last 8 years. So we really have to take care of our people at home. But I think we miss something that is also very important. We seem to think that the only territory that is capable of advancing freedom is within the United States. You know, Syria actually has its own land. It has its own territory. And by establishing people on their homeland, educating them, equipping them, there is no reason why they cannot achieve the same level of freedom, of democracy, with the same type of values in their homeland without exporting potential threats into the United States.
Yeah, you kind of wonder if the resources diverted there would be more useful and beneficial long term than it would be trying to force assimilation here, not to mention the fact that we really don't know who's coming in. This is so interesting to me because it's a huge argument. It is showing a continued division here in the United States. I'm not sure where this is going to go, but biblically, I think there are some things for us to draw from that in times past, a border was a border. It meant something. I mean, a line on a football field means something, doesn't it?
You would think so. You would hope so.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is interesting. Thank you for your time. What are you researching on these days?
Well, I am actually working on my volume 2, wow. Which delves into the historicity of the New Testament. I always go through historical sources first and establishing those, bringing some new concepts and ideas to the forefront. And then I'm also working on a chronology article regarding the Exodus and the Judges era.
Really? Will that be available on your website?
It will be. Actually, it will be available on Amazon. I will be having it published there. And I'm going to be making large portions of that article available on academia.edu, which is a site that many scholars post their work to.
All right, 30 seconds, plug Yahweh Exists 1.
Right. So Yahweh Exists 1 is really a book if you've questioned the historical validity, if you've questioned the reasons why God has said things that he has. For me, I had to prove it for myself rather than taking somebody else's word for it. You look over the divergent beliefs that we have in America today, what separates them?
All right, there it is. I showed you how big it is. Yahweh Exists. Check it out. Her website is YHWH.com. Thanks, Jodell. You're a delight. Talk to you again soon, okay?
Thank you so much, Perry. Appreciate this.
All right, God bless you. All right, we'll see you next time on Focus Today.